Good evening. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Stacey. I'm so excited that you are here with us as we are getting ready for our fourth annual Mental Health Awareness Summit. And we are doing it again because, we always like to prep you, prepare you, and excite you for this wonderful experience. So today, we are, like I said, it's our fourth annual Mental Health Awareness Summit. And this year, our theme is from trauma to triumph, healing the heart, mending the brokenness. We are so excited to welcome back Dr. Sabrina Jackson. She's going to be our keynote speaker again. Then we have some comedic relief, and this is going to be by comedian Stefan, who is coming all the way from Chicago to be with us. And then, of course, we're going to have our mistress of ceremony, Katrina Storm from the D, and she's going to be, keeping us going. We're excited because, again, as you know, this is a free event and it's for you and your entire family on Saturday, May 3rd. So at the end, we'll kind of go back over the details of the summit, but we're going to get into our talk because today we have a special guest speaker who is excited to be back with us. We have Dr. Shelee-Ann Fleming Bowden, and Dr. Shelee-Ann is with us for the second time. She was with us 2 years ago as a part of our panel as we talked about, my mental health is my business. But this year, Dr. Shelee is going to be one of our breakout speakers, and she is going to introduce us to who you are, Dr. Shelee. Go ahead. Absolutely. Let them know what's going on in your world, and we're going to get back to talking about the summit.
Absolutely. Thank you once again for having me. It is such a pleasure to see you, to connect with you.
Yes.
It's a little minute, but I am always a big support of the work that you do, like in the community. You are doing amazing things. So I just wanted to start with that.
Thank you.
And myself, again, my name is Dr. Shelee. I am a licensed psychologist, a speaker, and transformative wellness coach. Essentially, I help people break out of cycles that keep them stuck, whether that's in how they see themselves, how they move through life, or how they show up in their work and relationships.
Awesome. Well, tell us about the Mental Health Connect.
Absolutely.
What is that? What do you do there?
So in 2020, I founded my business, The Mental Connect. We are a mental health and wellness agency that focuses on event curation, in order to minimize stigma, increase access to resources, and really shift the culture and conversation of mental health and wellness so that it has those generational impacts, right? And so if we change how we talk about it, it'll shift how we talk about it to the next generation, how they talk about it to the next generation. And then we start to have these really big and meaningful and impactful shifts, because we create more space for conversations that typically don't get to happen in spaces where those things are needed and necessary.
100%. I remember when Dr. Shelee was with us 2 years ago, one of the things she talked so much about was breaking cycles. To the point that my pastor was there and he talked about it the next week in church and the week after about breaking cycles. And it was so impacting because it started us opening up a mental health component to our church where goes from talking about breaking cycles, Yes. And so when we talk about trauma, we know that most of our trauma is riveted in a cycle. Yep. And sometimes the cycle is literally just from one generation to the next, repeating the same patterns. And so I was thinking, who's the better person to talk about this than Dr. Shelee, who specializes in truly helping people to identify cycles and to break them. So when we come to the summit, when you come to the summit, her breakout session is going to be entitled Dealing with Generational Trauma, Breaking the Cycle. And that's so powerful because one of the things we know our communities or families or children or moms and dads are sometimes caught up with is the cycles that just cannot be broken. And so when we start getting into our discussion, Dr. Shelee, how about you say when you talk about generational trauma, what exactly does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I think about generational trauma, I think about the biological, the physiological, and the psychological effects of trauma that are then passed through generations. And
Wow.
so what was experienced or learned from your parents or from your grandparents and so on, that can often become the unwritten survival guide that is then passed down to you. And so when we talk about generational trauma, we're referring to these trauma patterns and symptoms that show up across multiple generations.
Multiple.
Mhm.
The other day, I was working with a family, and one of the things the mom was talking about how much her son reminds her of her ex-husband that was abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying to her, he may not even know where this pattern came from.
Mm-hmm.
He's dealing with something he has no clue about.
Mm-hmm. So much
And
didn't start with us, and yet we carry
exactly.
so much of the responses, the reactions, the patterns, the behaviors until somebody decides, you know what? No, no more. I talk
We
so much
have to
about
talk
auto.
about it.
Yes,
We
yes.
have to talk about it because if we don't, it just perpetuates.
It keeps
And
going.
you say you're just like your daddy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are things we hear. You're
Uh,
just like them. You remind me of this and that. But
uh-huh.
nobody's talking about, you know what, you're dealing with something you don't know what it is. You
Yeah,
don't know why you do it. And
yeah.
I'm gonna tell you why.
Like what's actually coming up for you? And is this even your stuff?
Yes.
Mm.
Good. So when we think about generational trauma,
Yep.
what is the impact on the family and the community? I know we kind of start just like going into it, but
Yeah.
like what does that look like in our families and our communities?
Oh, absolutely. The effects of generational trauma are so deeply rooted because when you think about it, there is the biological, right? And
Yes.
so there's this idea of epigenetics, and it is when our genes change how they're expressed. And so it's not changing the actual genes themselves, but the expression of them, meaning how some of these things come out. Have you ever heard somebody say, I've said it myself, but if you know somebody, if you said it to yourself, like, oh, I tend to run a little more anxious. Like your body just runs just a little more anxious, a little more on guard, a little more hyper vigilant. And you think about, okay, well, what must this have looked like a few generations back under
Yeah.
my parents or under my grandparents, where some of the access to certain resources, some of the concerns were more day to day, right? And so this idea of living and existing in survival then became
Hmm.
the norm. It became the routine. And so then you think about this body, and then who is then bringing forth another life, and who is also inside of the body as I'm going through whatever is going on within my life, whatever that pregnancy looked like, whatever experiences or things that may have been
Yep.
impacting me or affecting me. And then, okay, now I'm creating this other person whose nervous system is also connected to my nervous system, whose experiences are very much connected to mine before they even have,
Before they even have a chance.
okay, and look,
Yeah.
haven't
Of
even
expression,
the breath.
it's already
Yes,
happening.
yes,
Wow.
absolutely.
That's
And so
good.
think about some of those things. And so again, it leads to these changes in gene expression. It can disrupt the body's response to stress and how we deal with that. And so we know the effects that chronic stress has on us
Yeah.
physically and mentally. It can lead to issues of like chronic pain, gastrointestinal problems, anxiety, depression. But when we think about it from like a community and like a familial standpoint, you think about things like strained relationships, patterns of disconnection and avoidance, getting stuck in survival mode. It affects how we parent. It affects how we engage in like
Wow.
relationships with our partners. Like
Wow.
it's pervasive. It can be, and there's
Good.
a heaviness to that, but there is hope. I don't want anybody to hear all of this and just be bombarded by all of the heavy of it.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
hope. We have agency, and that's a great thing.
It's so real because even when you think about a family being affected, just because the family is affected, the community is naturally affected.
Absolutely.
And it's just kind of like it affects all the systems within our community because the family is affected.
And then if you really want to think about it, because like, yes, generational, but also you think about like the socio-political climates that some of the previous generations are existing in. And so those things really affecting the community as a whole too, because Our parents were going through some of the same things together. Our grandparents may have been going through some of these similar things together.
For
But
sure.
those things, like the environment, plays such a big role on how we experience
Absolutely.
stress and
Yeah.
like what that looks like and how we cope and how we handle is related to like what resources we may have available to us or what we may not have
Yeah.
available to us. All of those things then make a difference and work their way into this expression of generational trauma.
Big time. And even, like, is our communities and our families aware that this is what we're dealing with?
Yep. Yep.
So yeah. So how do we, and I know I don't want to go into your discussion because it's going down at the summit. You have time to really delve in and to connect with our attendees. But I wanted to know, just give a snippet, quick.
Yeah.
How do we even start breaking these cycles or even identifying and trying to rectify some of these patterns that are ongoing?
Yeah. That's such a good question because a lot of people are in that place where it's like, okay, so I know. Now what? Like, what do I do with this?
Yes.
What do I do with this knowledge? And if anybody was at the previous summit when I was sharing about autopilot, I'm going to start at that place because so much of this starts with you becoming more present in your life, starting to notice and become aware of your actions, your reactions, your responses to certain things. It's really hard to break a cycle that you don't even realize is happening, right? And so this idea of I want to stop something means I need to be present and aware that something is even happening.
That's it.
And then what you do from there is then you start to identify the family patterns and norms that show up in your thinking and in the way that you navigate your life. What were the unspoken rules? What were the spoken rules? What were the norms? How do you, or what did you come to believe was expected of you? How do things that you were shown or modeled show up in your life today? Like, what are these things that you're like, oh, wait, where else have I seen that? Where else have I noticed that? What is that even mine? And I think one part that comes after that that's really important that I think sometimes we skip over. We know we don't want this thing, but a lot of times we don't give a lot of credit to like, okay, well, what is it that you do want? Because we can't tell our bodies what not to do because, okay, well, what do you want me to do? Where am I going? If I'm not doing what's default, if I'm not doing what is my pattern, if what is like just naturally in alignment for me to do, what am I doing instead? And that takes consideration, that takes thoughtfulness, that takes conviction, that takes a lot of things that are connected to like self-discovery and really figuring out what it is that you want for yourself.
Wow.
And then getting to the place of pause because default happens automatically. And so when we can slow ourselves down just enough to notice where we're choosing, we can make a lot of shifts and change.
Wow.
That's where the freedom is. That's where the growth is.
Wow, that's deep. So being able to slow down, and sometimes that's not easy, especially for our individuals that struggle with like racing thoughts and just like ongoing survival mode, as you talked about, like they just trying to survive today. And slowing down and thinking is not necessarily easy. But this is where you get to connect with a psychologist like Dr. Shelee that specializes in helping us to identify ways to target these areas in our life that continue to perpetually expose themselves and show up in different ways. Sometimes we don't want to show up, but it show up through us that way. I was working with a family the other day, briefly, nothing in depth, but one of the things the mom told me is she had 6 children and 4 are dead.
Okay.
All 2 were murdered, 2 got chronically just like randomly ill, and it was like a series. All of this happened in the last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
On top of that, the other section of the family deals with chronic incarceration. Then you have the other that deals with stuff like rape. And then she was telling me she had a kid that is on the autism spectrum and requires special needs and basically just overwhelmed with the traumatic grief and the all the complexities,
like
the traumas
from all angles.
All angles. So this is all on a whole nother level of depth, right? So what do we tell our families that struggle with complex trauma in their lives? Like we're saying, okay, breaking the cycle, but here they have people dying. This one happening. This is happening over here. What are some things we can start to tell them to kind of look at or do to resolve these things?
I think if there's one thing, and this, it's going to feel like, oh, yeah, okay, I hear you, whatever. And yet it has such a big impact when you're actually going through this process. And it is having compassion for yourself in the process. There are a lot of things that are connected to like generational healing. And in that, there is work and there is heaviness and there is the reality that we don't get to just like silo off and go off in solitude and heal. Oftentimes, the rest of our life is still life and real bad.
Yeah.
Hard. And so like being able to be in a space where you can check in with yourself and say, okay, do I have the capacity for this right now? Because healing work, this is life's work. This is ongoing work. And sometimes we have this desire to like, oh, let me heal so I can level up, check it off the list and keep it pushing so I can go to my next thing. And the reality is some of these things are, they're going to take lifetimes. Not just yours. Why? Because it didn't start with just you. And so this pressure that we can put on ourselves to undo generations and generations and generations and generations of stuff is an unfair expectation.
Right.
Place.
Yeah.
And so then giving yourself the space to say, I can do my part in this. And I think that's where you get to figure out, okay, well, what is my part? What do I have the tools or the resources to do? If I don't have those tools and resources, let me go figure out how to go get some tools and resources. And that's why things like the summit are so important, because it brings together so many different people.
So many.
And like opportunities for like, okay, well, what can I do? How can I move through this in a world where, let's be honest, like systemic and institutionalized, like racism exists. And so like those things are embedded within the systems and in the laws and in like just the fabrics. And so often we are trying to heal while we're also being harmed. And that's challenging. And so give yourself the space to know that you aren't Superman, you aren't Superwoman, you aren't superhuman. You get to take this within you get to take this step by step.
Asking for help, knowing when to say, I need help.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's such a work. And, just being able to say, you know what? Today I didn't cry. That's good
For
enough.
some, today I did, because maybe it's on the other side. Maybe
that's it.
Walk along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today I did cry. Today it's just, it's so embedded and it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's something that we deserve for ourselves, to the healing. Like we said, healing the heart, mending the brokenness, because that space really exists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing I have said to people many times is this idea that, okay, if we take this one step at a time, if I just keep showing up for myself, because that's what healing is. It's not one big act where all of a sudden, like, oh, I did it once and now I'm good. No, your default will try and come back every time for a while. But when you continue to show up and you continue to choose again, like, okay, I'm going to try, I'm going to work. Yes, some of these cycles are pervasive. Yes, some of them are deeply rooted and long standing. But when you come at this with your eyes open, knowing like, okay, I'm off of autopilot, I know what's going on, you give yourself room to shift how you show up in your own patterns.
Yeah.
And that is what we're bringing back. That's what we're restoring. This agency that sometimes gets lost when it's like, oh my gosh, everything feels out of my control right now.
Wow. And it's like an orange. It's one whole orange, but you have all these different pegs.
Ooh, okay.
That gives you the whole orange. So like you said, it's not just the one thing, right? It's all these different pieces that come together.
Mhm.
Wow, I'm excited about this conversation that you're going to be having
I am.
because it's probably something that we can't just do one time. It's
No.
not one conversation,
Oh no,
right?
it's ongoing multiple times. And like what I'm so
Multiple.
excited about for this particularly, because I am a type of person who, like, when I go to different places, I'm like, okay, how do I apply it? I am very much an application girl. And so, in this idea of what I want to make sure that I give to the people who are in attendance, I want you to walk away with where you can start. And that will
Yes.
look different because everybody's going to come in different places. But I am
Yeah.
hoping to really reach many people in where they might be at so they can know, okay, I've got a direction. I've got whatever that next step might be. We're really getting in on like, okay,
Yeah.
what can we actually do to move through this? Because the talking is needed, but the action also
But the
is.
action. Yeah. And for some people, the talking is going to be like validating. You
Absolutely.
know, like, wow, I'm not the only one. Wow, she's saying what I'm going through. Like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yep.
because you talk to some people and they're like, this is crazy to even hear themselves say it, but to know that you're not alone. Like,
Yep.
you are not alone. All of us deal with some level of
Absolutely.
trauma, some level, sometimes it's complex, sometimes it's chronic,
Yep.
but it's happening to people and we're not alone.
Absolutely not. And like
So
you feel seen in it as well. Like absolutely.
yeah. And so, you know what? If you were supposed to, you know, encourage our audience today, Dr. Shelley, because again, I don't want to give away your session. You have to show up on May 3rd to hear this, So
Yes.
we just kind of wetting your palate, like getting you stimulated and
Yes.
excited for May 3rd. But if you were to encourage our families tonight, or the individual, the person that's dealing with generational trauma, just trauma in general, and it
Yeah.
may just seem hard to heal. How do you encourage them? And just let's encourage our audience tonight.
Yeah. If I could say one thing to this person, I would tell you that the work you're doing is not easy. And so if it feels hard, it's because it is. And that's okay. That is okay. It's okay to feel the heaviness of that, but also to feel your own strength in it too, because you decided, you chose. So many people are in this space, and it doesn't matter how young or how old they may be. There's so many people who are deciding, no, not anymore. It stops right here.
That's it.
And that
Yes.
decision right there, that's huge. And so congratulate yourself for that step and then come to the summit, right? Because sometimes what happens is we have this idea and it's been sitting on your heart, and you're like, man, I know I've been in this place where I've been wanting to break cycles. And then what'll happen is you'll come across this video and you're like, ooh, is this for me? And then doubt will come in. And
Yeah.
then avoidance will come in, or uncertainty will come in. And in that moment, when you have that moment to choose to come. It's free. Choose
It's
to
free.
that
That
step.
amazing four little word. It's free. It's always been free for our community to make sure that there are no barriers
Absolutely.
to you obtaining what you need for the next leg of your journey.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of mental health awareness, it's that insight that's needed to help you move to the next level.
Yep.
And just being able to avail yourself for such a time as this, because it's truly important.
Mm-hmm.
um I think one thing that weighs heavy on my heart, as therapists, we hear stories all day long. I don't know about you, we hear stories, right? And some of them are just like heart-wrenching. But one thing I need to avoid, and I have to avoid sometimes, is the news. But
Mm-hmm.
when you think of what happens in our news every day,
Mm-hmm.
it's always something
Yeah.
that is disheartening, even more disheartening. And when
Mm-hmm.
you think about who are affected by these actions that are happening, the shootings, the stealing, the losing of jobs, this shutting down, all of these things that's happening around us, we know that we need this day.
Absolutely.
You need this day to come on out. Again, it's going to be Saturday, May 3rd. And it's going to be at the UWM Sports Complex. This is in Pontiac, Michigan. We've been at this location for the last 3 years, and we are going to have chair massages, mini facials, painting with a twist. We're going to have the breakout sessions, health screens. We're going to have prizes. We have our comedian, because that's laughter for the soul. So much more. One of the things that just happened this week is we're also partnering with Forgotten Harvest, and they're coming to give away food, because we know sometimes that there's food insecurity in our community that affects how people are able to even be attentive to their mental health because they're trying to survive. So they're going to be coming with, I think it's almost 200 and something boxes of food. So you want to be there to be a part of this experience. Everything is free. We'll have lunch, we'll talk, we'll laugh, we'll have our DJ, we'll just have a great time. So I want you to make sure that you are there and you register to be there. We have vendor slots, sponsor opportunities, but we want you to be there. So, yep, there it is. We have, you can volunteer, you can be a partner where you help us. The partners help us make this free to our community by sharing with, helping us share the cost, so it's not put on our community. Vendor opportunities, so you can share what your business does, and then you can register. Where when you register, we know that we can account for you. We can keep you in the loop with all the things that we're doing in the community. You can be a part of our monthly newsletter, and there's just so much more that we do, and we want to make sure that you're a part of that. So before we get closed down, Dr. Shelee, how can we find you and where can we find you?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Shelee. I've got a few exciting things I'll be rolling out over the next few months for visionaries and cycle breakers. And so if that's you and you're interested, be sure to follow me, because I'm going to make sure you get on my email list so that you are among the first to hear about these different workshops, these different events and activities that I have lined up for you guys.
And listen, her stuff is good. She does her weekly podcast, What's in My Cup, and it's like good stuff. So make sure you follow her. Get on Instagram, follow her, stay in tune with the things that she's doing in the community that's also helping us to break some cycles and transform our lives every day. I thank you for being with us this evening, Dr. Shelee. You know, such always so refreshing to encounter and engage with you. And I look forward to seeing you on May 3rd. And in addition to Dr. Shelee, I'm looking forward to seeing you too. Yes, and you too. Be there and be square. Actually, the event starts at noon, from noon to 4. So you can sleep in, go get your coffee, go to the gym, and still show up for the summit. So be square there everywhere on May 3rd at UWM Sports Complex for our 4th annual Mental Health Awareness Summit, from trauma to triumph, healing the heart and mending the brokenness. See you then. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye, Dr. Shelee.
Bye.
We have been planning for almost 10 months for this moment, and I am so excited that you interrupted your schedule to be here with us.